Hey peeps, here's a video for Investigation 5, Week 3. Plant reproduction, also known as flower flash. Let's go do it. Okay. So what are we learning about? Still learning about parts of a plant, transpiration, photosynthesis, only a little bit this week. And really we're focusing on sexual and asexual reproduction in plants this week. Plants? Sexual reproduction? Yes, actually. Most people think of seeds when they think of plant reproduction, and seeds are very important. So this section is all about how do adaptations of seeds help a plant to survive. If you think about what you know about seeds or beans or nuts, here are some of the things we came up with in class. Beans are tasty, they grow, they're full of energy, protein, fats. They can grow in stalks, inside pea pods, inside a hard shell, inside fruits. And then we thought about, okay, well, what structures do they have to help them survive? And if you look at this video, you're going to see a seed, a lima bean. And you can try this experiment at home. This person is just kind of trying to pry open a bean to look and see what is it like inside. If you have any beans, you can try this with your beans at home, or seeds. Try to take a look at what's going on inside. So they're carving into that seed coat, which is that tough, protective outer layer. So that's one structure that helps the seed survive. It's got a hard outer shell. And then they're finally able to peel it open. And you can see there's actually two halves. And there's that starchy, tasty part that once we cook it is really yummo. And then there's this little part that looks almost like a little root. And that's the baby plant. So the starchy part is the food. It's called a cotyledon. And then the little baby plant is called an embryo. And then the only other thing is the seed coat is on the outside. So those are the structures that help the plant develop, the seed develop and help the plant survive. So we said baby plant, embryo, a food source, which is that cotyledon, an outer shell coat. That food source, that's really something that we use for food a lot. Human animals use those seeds for food, those beans. It's that really full of energy thing. Well, why is it there? The plant didn't make it for us, for charity, right? The seeds are designed to help support baby plant growth. So that's the energy source for the baby plant as it's growing, because it doesn't have any leaves yet. It's just a seed, right? And so where does it get its energy from? Has to get energy from inside the seed until it has leaves. If you want to try dissecting a softened seed, now that gets a lot easier. So put your seed in water for an hour and check it out. You can even do this with a peanut. You can see the seed coat softens in water. So think about why that would be helpful. If you were a seed, you would want to soften in water when you're in a nice watery environment to start to grow. So it opened right up this time. And there's that little embryo baby plant again. The seed coat is really soft. And if we hadn't peeled it open, maybe it would start to grow. Okay, so we just recorded some more observations of what we noticed. Squishy, it opened up easily, the seed coat softened. And so then how do the following parts of the plant help it to survive? So we just filled in a few ideas here. The seed coat is very protective. It offers protection. The cotyledon, those are those beginner leaves that store energy. It's that inner, like that starch-rich protein. And they turn into beginner leaves that store energy. We'll see that in this next video. The embryo is a baby plant, just like embryo in a human, that would be a baby human. Embryo in a seed is a baby plant. So when you're eating your beans, think about that. You're eating little baby plants in there. So here's the time-lapse germination of a seed. Germination just means when a seed develops. That's what germination means. So this seed is germinating. It's starting to develop and grow. And we see this little thing is popping out. That's going to be the root. See how it's instinctively going down? It knows to grow down and get the roots developed underground. Once it has roots, it has structure, and you're going to see that it starts to develop even more. The seed coat looks nice and soft. This must be a watery environment. And here, those little cotyledons are starting to emerge. There's probably a lot going on underground that we can't see. Kind of looks like an alien, but you can tell that it's developing and developing and developing. It's making a huge leap from being a seed to being a plant. So there's really a lot going on right now. And so here are those cotyledons. They store the energy until actual true leaves develop. So now this first plant is able to do photosynthesis and get its energy from sunlight. And you can see it's growing bigger every day. And it's doing these little adjustments to be able to capture sunlight. This little one's getting shaded out. But you can see them moving to try to capture the most sunlight, like little solar panels. Okay. All right, so next we talked about flowers. Why do you think plants make flowers? Why do they spend all this time and energy making flowers? Is it for the bees? Is it charity? Is it for us so that they smell nice? No, of course not. It has to do with how does a plant reproduce. So flowers are part of plant reproduction. In class, we talked about pollen. Kids talked about seeds. Kids talked about pollinators. And then we filled in this parts of a flower diagram. Well, there's a cute little bee, which I had to insert an image. Parts of a flower. So here we have, this is the female part of the flower. It's called the stigma. It's the sticky stigma, where pollen could land. And then pollen would actually travel down through this, which is called a style. And it would fertilize an egg inside the ovary of the flower. So pollen is actually the male reproductive part of a flower. And inside the ovary are things called ovules, which are eggs, the female reproductive part of a flower. So there's actually male and female parts to plant and flower reproduction. And then we have, these are the anthers. There's 1, 2, 3. Sometimes there's many, many more. They're covered in sticky pollen. So what happens when you're a bee? You buzz on over. You get covered in pollen on your way down to slurp nectar, usually from deep within the flower. Usually the nectar is down here. But now this bee is covered in pollen, it's going to fly away to a new flower. And maybe on that new flower, it brushes against the stigma, and some of the pollen from this flower will travel down and fertilize an ovule inside the ovary. So make sure you label these. We've got petals, we've got sepals. Sepals are sort of like a false petal. They open and close when the flower opens and closes. And then we'll fill these in. Pollen sperm lands on the stigma. It forms a pollen tube. And look, it can travel all the way down into the ovary where there are ovules, which are eggs. So it actually fertilizes an ovule inside the flower. This starts to sound like human reproduction because a lot of the words are the same, right? Pollen contains sperm. An ovule is an egg. So you've got pollen is half of the genetic material needed for a new baby. An egg is half of the genetic material needed for a new baby. 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole. Once that fertilization occurs, it can develop into a seed. Inside here, inside the fruit, of the flower. If this is a pear flower, this ovary would develop into a pear, and the seeds would be inside the pear. Yum, yum. Here's just a label of the ovule or egg, and this is the pollen grain coming down to fertilize it. Actually, it's a sperm cell coming down to fertilize it. Okie dokie. There's the egg cell. That's the female cell. This is the male cell. So save and close. And this next part requires you to put the plant reproduction things in order. So you have to read through these and figure out what order they go in. Then you can copy and paste them onto here. So we figured out that E would be number 1. You should read through these and figure out what other order you can do on your own, and then you can check your answers with me. Okay? Because if you just copy them, you don't think about it at all. I didn't want you to think about it. So start with E at the top. Just copy, Control C. So before I did this, it looked like this. That's what yours looks like. So I know that E starts it. So I'm going to put a number 1. And then I'm going to Control V. Okay, now it's copied. And I turned it yellow only to signify that I had already done that one. Okay, and you can go through and finish the rest. Flowering plant slideshow. Fill in the answers to the questions. If a plant doesn't have flowers, how does it reproduce? Look at a fern. Does a fern ever make flowers? No. How does a fern reproduce? That's what we're going to talk about. Other examples of plants that never make flowers. Mosses never make flowers. Pine trees, they don't ever make flowers, right? They also never drop their leaves. So it's different than a flowering plant. So look, here are mosses and ferns. So this is one way to reproduce if you don't have flowers. You make spores. It's very similar to a fungus, isn't it? So they have spores, and they're able to spread their spores usually with the help of water, generally. Which is why you find moss and ferns in wet places. You don't usually find them in dry places. They like wet forests like we have here in the Pacific Northwest. You might make cones, right? If you're a pine tree, a fir tree, a sequoia, or a cedar, or any evergreen, another word for it is conifer. Any conifer, evergreen, makes cones, and they form seeds inside cones. So reproduction happens inside cones. And often the male reproductive cell, the sperm, which is basically pollen, is carried by wind. Carried by wind from one cone to another. Isn't that weird? And then these are called gymnosperms, based on the fact that they make cones. Gymnosperms have seeds and cones, no fruit. Angiosperms are flowering plants. They have seeds, flowers, and fruit. And this is one other way you can reproduce if you don't have flowers or cones. You can do vegetative reproduction, where new plants grow from an already existing plant, like a potato. You know, if you leave your potato for too long in the cupboard and it starts to sprout roots and stuff, roots and shoots. Well, you can plant that potato and give it some time, give it a few months, but new potatoes can grow from an old potato. And some history here. So when did plants evolve? How old are plants? When did they show up on planet Earth? The first land plants appeared 450 million years ago. As a reference, the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago. So a lot has happened since this time. This is a long time ago. That's when the first land plants appeared. They used spores to reproduce, and they needed water to spread their spores. Here's liverwort. And then we get ferns 350 million years ago. This is a long time ago. There were not cute little fuzzy animals back then. There were definitely no mammals. There weren't even reptiles. Maybe just the beginnings of amphibians, fish, things like clams and worms, but nothing fancy. So we're talking a long time ago. Ferns show up. And we know how many ferns are still on Earth. They've been around a long time. We get conifers, gymnosperms, 800 million years ago. They bear seeds, and they're able to reproduce in drier places. So they're a little bit more adapted. They don't have to live in a swamp. They're adapted to drier places because the seeds are able to kind of be dormant for a little while maybe, and then grow when the conditions are right. Okay, and then finally 135 million years ago, so dinos are around then. Dinos are cruising. They're doing great. They're happy. They have no idea what's going to happen to them. Angiosperms develop. So these are flowering plants. And since then, 135 million years ago, they have become the most diverse type of plant on Earth. So they're everywhere now. All of our food are angiosperms, if you think about it. All of our fruits and veggies and grains and rice, any kind of like flour or pasta you like to eat, it all comes from angiosperms, plants with flowers. How did they become so successful? How did they take over planet Earth? Why are they the most dominant type of plant now? And a lot of kids were talking about, well, maybe it's because of pollinators and bees and animals that help angiosperms to reproduce. And I think they're absolutely right. I think animals and angiosperms, plants with flowers, are besties. And without each other, we really wouldn't be who we are. We wouldn't be where we are. And really, we go hand in hand. So as animals take over the globe, and animals evolve, and mammals evolve, and birds evolve, at the same time we see angiosperms take over the globe, and plants taken over with flowers. Okay, so you should be able to answer these final questions based on the slideshow and submit on Schoology. Let me know if you need any help. Send me an email. Have a great weekend.